Hello everyone and welcome to our session today with a very unique and entertaining Rod Quantock. So today we're coming live to you into your living room or wherever you may be today as part of the Bayside Seniors Festival for October. So I'd like to begin with acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land in which each of us joined today. For me, that's the Bunurong people, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I'm Paula Clancy, the Community Resilient and Safety Coordinator at Bayside City Council. So today we're going to hear about the many interesting and humorous experiences of the journey of Rod Quantock through his descriptive storytelling. And when we finish Rod's session, we're going to open up for some questions. So please use the Q&A function to pop your questions in there, which would be fantastic. We'll also be recording this session for those that weren't able to make it today. So we invite you to sit back and relax and enjoy the show. So welcome, Rod.
Welcome, and thank you very much for coming. It's really nice to be here at a distance over the Zoom, and I'd like to begin by paying my respects to the traditional owners of the platform upon which we meet, Mark Zuckerberg and Google. Now, what you see here is a picture of me taken, well, I was born in 8, and this is me in Springvale at about 2 years old. And this is me today. And what I wanted to talk about was the journey from that's me again. Oh, isn't it good? Oh, he's so good. I wanted to talk about just my life, really. I'm now a senior, and so I'm allowed to talk about Seniors Week to seniors people. And as I said, I was born in Melbourne, and I was born in Springvale. This picture is actually me in front of the family home in Springvale. Now, when I was born in Springvale, actually I was born in Coburg, but then I was transported to Springvale. That's the family home there. You'll see that I'm in a paddock next to the home. Springvale in those days was rural, and that house sat in the middle of paddocks filled with cows. And when I was about 2.5, my parents swapped houses with a family in Coburg. And from that point on, I lived in Coburg for the next 20 odd years. Now, I've been given a series of questions by Paula and the team at Bayside, and I won't go through them in order, but I'll hope to cover them all as we talk. So I was born to people that well, actually a man and a woman, as it turned out. And at the time, I had no idea that they were my parents. But as I grew older, they were around all the time, and I came to know them as mum and dad. And they were, like all of the people of that generation, they were people who'd experienced, if not directly, the First World War. They had grown up as children in the shadow of the First World War, and they'd seen the streets with legless and armless men who were blinded, men who'd been gassed, women who'd suffered as well. And that generation then moved into the 20s, and you know, they were the roaring 20s, and they were a time when people said there'll be no more wars. The First World War was the war to end all wars, and things are going to be really great from now on. And then they ran smack bang into the Depression, and my father, who I think could have gone on to be a really brilliant man had he got, well, he was a brilliant man, but had he had the opportunity to go to end his education and go to university, he could have really become a very significant person in our community. But the Depression and the loss of his father meant that he had to stop school and go to work. And then, fortunately, the Depression ended very happily with the Second World War. And my father he was in Darwin the first time it was bombed. He served in Bougainville in New Guinea. He was smart. He didn't have a rifle. He had a cannon. And I've learned very early on, cannons are better than rifles. He divorced after the war and married my mother, whose husband had been killed in the crash of a Lancaster bomber over Europe. And so they got together in a way that I don't even like to think about and had me. And so I grew up again with people who thought that the Second World War was the war to end all wars. And but a generation that felt that they'd made sacrifices, that they'd lost loved ones, the loved ones had returned not in one piece or not the person they were before they went to war. And so what they wanted was a better world. So it was a world that embarked on the welfare state. It was a world of equality. It was a world of sharing and egalitarianism. And it was and I realised many years later that every one of my teachers in primary school was in some way involved in the Second World War, as were many of my high school teachers. Now, I was asked, one of the questions I was asked was, do I have any connection to Bayside? And look, I lived in Coburg and I was 21 before I put my foot on the other side of the Yarra River, except for trips down to Dramana for the holidays. But well, this is a long story, but I'll tell it anyway. My parents weren't what you'd call religious, but they insisted we go to Sunday school. I think it was a way of getting us out of the house so that they could engage in things that their children shouldn't know they were doing. Anyway, I had two sisters because of that. So I went to the nearest church, which was a Methodist church. And I was given threepence every Sunday morning to put in the plate. And somehow miraculously, this is when I started to believe in God. By the time I got to church, I had tuppence, we used to call it, tuppence worth of mixed lollies and a penny for the plate. Every Sunday, that threepence turned into tuppence worth of mixed lollies and a penny for the plate. God worked miracles with me. But it was at the Methodist Sunday school that I became enamored by performing. I was in the West Coburg Methodist Sunday School pageant. And I was tall. I'm still quite tall. I'll stand up and show you. See, I'm still really tall. And I got the job in the pageant of being the guiding star. My job was to stand up the back and twinkle over Bethlehem. I had a little star made out of cardboard, which I cut out myself. And then I put clag. Remember clag? I love clag. Clag is the only glue that actually sounds like what it is. Yoo-hoo doesn't sound like glue, but clag sounds like glue. And clag was the universal thing. We had a subject in primary school called craft, where we made our own things. I mean, you tell that to children today, they got no idea what you're talking about, but we made our own things. And that particular Christmas, our craft teacher said to us, we're going to make a Christmas card next week. So what I want you to do is bring in an old Christmas card from last year, which we dutifully did. And then he gave us a piece of foldy over cardboard like that. See, foldy over cardboard like that. And he said, now cut off the front of that old Christmas card from last year. And he gave us a pair of plastic safety scissors. And we had to grind our way through post-war cardboard. You cannot imagine, it was almost like masonite with our plastic safety scissors. It took us 2 periods to get through. And finally, you cut that picture off and you held it up and said, sir, I've got it. And then he said, well, glue it onto the front of your bit of foldy over cardboard, which I did, and miraculously the foldy over cardboard had become a Christmas card. It was really fantastic. And clag was a wonderful thing, because if you misbehaved in craft, the craft teacher would say to you, Quantock, stand over there. Quantock, poke out your tongue. And he would go to a bottle of clag, industrial size bottle of clag. I can't show you here, but it was really, really big bottle of clag. And he pulled out a brush the size of a yard broom, and he would paint a stripe of clag down your tongue, and you had to go, thank you, sir. Now, I still need my hit of clag every day, but it's gone from our schools now, and that's why young people take drugs. Anyway, I had used clag to make the little star, and my mother had sewn a little bit of elastic around the back of it so that it would sit on my hand, and I had a sheet over my head so I wasn't visible except for 2 little eyes, And I just twinkled up in front of Bethlehem, and the three wise men trotted along in dressing gowns and a towel wrapped around their head, because that's what we thought Middle Eastern people looked like. And Mary came along at 5 years old, giving birth to a plastic doll. It was really gruesome. And twinkle, twinkle, twinkle. And in the middle of all that, I looked and I saw my parents down in the audience, and I waved my little star at them like that. And I got a laugh, and I thought, well, that's it. I'm going to be a comedian. So that was what I set my sights on. And in what would it have been, about 1958, my father, and we were poor. I mean, after the war, we were poor. My father was a factory worker, came back and couldn't get any work. And I remember as a very young child, perhaps 3 or 4 years old, the family sitting in the gutter in Sydney Road, Coburg. Me, my stepbrother, my mother and my father just sitting there in misery, wondering what we were going to do, homeless and hopeless. And a tram came past and it was empty. And my father said, well, bugger it, we'll live on that. So we lived on the tram. And because we were on the tram all the time, people thought my father was the conductor, and they kept giving him money. And in no time at all, we could afford a house, but they were happier days. Anyway, when I was about 5 or 6 or 7 or sometime around there, my father was up in Sydney Road, Coburg, doing some shopping, and he looked in a shop window and he saw in the window a microphone stand. Now, it turned out to be a Fritz and Warburg microphone stand, which is a German brand. Probably none of you get Microphone Stand Monthly, but for those who do read it, you would know Fritz and Warburg are the Rolls-Royce of microphone stands. And he saw one in a shop that he could afford, because at the end of the Second World War, the German cabaret industry was decimated. And there were more microphone stands than there were singers and comedians to use them. So they flooded the world market with cheap, inexpensive Fritz and Warburg microphone stands. And my father managed to get it, and he brought it home, and we set it up in the lounge room, and we were very happy. And then when I was about 14 or 15, we saved up and we got a microphone, and that's where my career began. But we were ecumenical with our religion. While I went to the Methodists on Sunday, I played basketball for the Salvation Army. I played football for the Young Catholic Workers, and I went to the Baptists because they had the best Cup Day picnic. And we used to go to Sandringham for our Cup Day picnic in the back of a moving van. And I don't know how many of us, 40 or 50 of us, just in the back of the moving van, no seat belts, no seats, just sitting there, jogging away down the bumpity down to Sandringham, or well, it's a bay really. It's not there. I continued my schooling. I didn't do the Christmas pageant again because I wasn't allowed. I brought disgrace on the church and God. But I went through primary school. I went into secondary school. But some of you will be old enough to remember the 1956 Olympic Games, and I remember them extremely well. I went to visit the Heidelberg housing estate that they built for the athletes. And I saw every day almost in the Herald Sun in the lead up to the Olympics, as you see with all of them now, these architects' drawings of what the new venues would look like, the velodrome, sorry, and the old swimming pool, which was shaped like that. It was like that. It was a sort of, what would you call that, a diamond shape on its point, and yet it stood up, and it was an amazing building. And I just thought, how do they do that? And I very interested in architecture. And so I started to think, well, perhaps comedy is not the place for me, and I decided to become an architect. Alcohol was. I used to be left in a car outside the front of a pub with my siblings while my parents went inside and drank and made merry. And we used to get pink raspberry lemonade, which turned us into monsters for days on end. So I'd never had any alcohol, but I drank some claret, and I drank some more claret, and then I had some more claret. And I thought, well, if you can't stop there, so I had some more claret, and then I had a bit more claret. And I got extremely drunk, and I went upstairs to where they were rehearsing what was called the Architects' Review, which was a really famous student review. And I said to them, I've got an idea you might like to use. And so I just stood in front of these people, very drunk, and I just talked through half a dozen stories that I thought somebody else could use. They decided it would be best that if I did them, and because I was drunk, I said I would. And then I lived for quite some time in terror at the prospect of opening night. But I remember that night I went down to catch the tram back to Coburg, and I went to sleep. And the conductor woke me up at the end of the line, which was Faulkner. And he said, are you getting off here? And I said, where are we? And he said, Faulkner. I said, no, I've gone past my stop. So we went back the other way, and I woke up at Flinders Street. And he said, is this where you wanted to go? And I said, no, we've gone. So I yo-yoed back and forwards till I finally ended up in Coburg. So I went into the student review. I really loved it. And from that point on, I went back to my original dream of becoming a comedian, which wasn't easy. This was, when would this have been? About 1972. There was nowhere to work. There were no theatre restaurants. There were no theatres. There was no comedy. What comedy there was what used to be called blue comedy, which you only ever saw at a pleasant Sunday morning at a football club. And if you've never been to a pleasant Sunday morning at a football club, they're not very pleasant. And if you remember Zig and Zag, and I know there's been horror stories about one of them ever since, but I saw Ron Blaskett and Jerry G do their blue act, and Jerry G was the most lascivious, sexist, monstrous person you could ever imagine for a wooden puppet. And Zig, I think it was, I also saw do a pleasant Sunday morning at a football club, and it was just, you cannot believe what comedy used to be. So I began with a group of people. We took our show off campus, and we put it on in the back theatre of what was then the Pram Factory. Sadly, that's gone, but we ran a very successful season there. And in 1974, a venue opened called the Flying Trapeze Cafe in Brunswick Street, Fitzroy. And that's where we went and started performing. And we did quite a number of shows there, and over a 2-year period. Then a place called The Last Laugh opened in Smith Street, which was a huge and very, very successful venue. And between the Flying Trapeze Cafe and The Last Laugh, we decided, because people used to they were theatre restaurants, you got a meal and a show, and people used to throw food at you, and we decided, and we worked out it wasn't us that they were concerned about, it just the food was horrible. So we opened our own place called the Comedy Cafe, and we got a 5-star chef in who'd been the chef at Two Faces and got bored with the wealth of people there and decided he'd like an adventure cooking in a little bohemian place in Brunswick Street, Fitzroy. And that was hugely successful. And it was there that I did a show called Bus. I'll just show you, Bus Son of Tram. And sorry, that's me. I'll just get out of the way because that's me too, but this is me. And that fella on the screen there is Trevor the Chook. Now, Bus was a show where I used to take a busload of people who didn't know where they were going, and we went to visit people who didn't know we were coming. Now, it started very simply as a bus tour of the Myers Christmas window. It started in November, this show. And I used to get people to pay me to take them on a tour of the Myers Christmas windows. And we'd walk up and down and get back on the bus. But the Myers Christmas windows, they are a wonderful institution. I've been to every one of them since I was one. I probably went in a pram when I was 1 year old. And it's the only place in the world where you can see a grown man and his grown wife and their not so grown children in dressing gowns. because there are people in this world who come from as far away as Tasmania to see the Myers Christmas window, and they walk up and down, up and down, up and down, and then they go home again and take off their dressing gowns, get into bed, and they don't get up again until next December, when they put on their dressing gowns and go back to see the Myers Christmas window. Now, the first year I went to see them on the bus, the story was Jesus and the Seven Dwarfs. It's always a children's story. And the year after that, I can't remember what it was the year after that, but always animated, beautiful windows. I'm sure you've all seen them. And so I kept going. This bus show was sold out. It sold out through November, December, January, February into March. And all I had to do was just take them in, say a few words about the windows. And I did have Trevor, the chook, on a stick as a sort of rallying point, because one night I went in and 6 of our party got lost and separated from the rest of the group, and they ended up going home to Braybrook with a Yugoslav family in a Leyland P76. Now, they had a lovely time, but that wasn't the point. I felt responsible. So I got the stick with the rubber chook on it so people would be able to see me in the throng. And I also gave people a pair of Groucho Marx nose and spectacles as a sort of rallying, a sort of a disguise, if you like, again to say we're all part of this group here, we're not one of you. But then one Sunday in January, Myers, without notifying me, dismantled their Christmas windows. And I had to take 60 people with the little noses and a rubber chook in to see the Myers Christmas windows, and I had to show them 6 windows on the theme of sportswear for the active miss. Now, I was in trouble. I didn't know what to do. So I decided that I would take them up to the Fitzroy Gardens, and we went to visit Captain Cook's cottage, and he wasn't home. The upstairs bedroom light was on, but nobody answered the door, and I assumed he was down at Sandringham for the holidays or something. So in our disappointment, I walked up the hill to the Hilton Hotel, and we walked in, all 60 of us, noses on, me with the rubber chook, and I walked up to the desk, and behind the desk was the night clerk, a youngish man who'd been to the Hilton School of Dealing with the Public, but it hadn't actually taught him to deal with a man with a rubber chook and 60 people with noses on. And I said to him, I'd like to book a double room for 60 people, please. And he said, well, I'm sorry, sir, we don't have any double rooms available. And I said, well, look, we'll take a single. And that's when they threw us out. Now, the Hilton's got a very big plate glass window which looks through into its cocktail lounge area. So I got 60 people to press 60 Groucho Marx nose and spectacles up against that window. And on the count of 3, we sang, I who have nothing. And the sense of power was overwhelming. And from there, we went to budgerigard judging competitions, the World Scrabble Championships, where you're not really welcome, disturbing the peace. We went to the Police Social Club, where we stole an ashtray, and they still haven't caught us. We went to private homes, we went to restaurants, we went all over the place. And it became really very famous. And I travelled the world with that. I took it to the Edinburgh Festival. I took it to Bendigo. That's how far afield I went with this show. And I must have done 400 or 500 or more of these bus trips, everyone different. We never went to the same place twice. And it was the most joyous thing to do, because in the end, what I learned is that basically people are nice. If you approach people with a rubber chook on a stick, when 60 people with Groucho Marx nose and spectacles on, people sort of perk up a bit. And I look at the world today, and I see a world where we don't trust one another. We're frightened of strangers. We've got locks on our doors. We've got bars on our windows. But there is intrinsically something about people, if they're not abused by society, if they're included, if they get their fair share, the sort of things that my parents argued for after the Second World War. If we had that egalitarian spirit, which we have a myth about in Australia, but don't necessarily practice, then we wouldn't have this so much division. I mean, one of the problems with Australia, sorry, is that it's, and I hate to use this in mixed company, but Australia is one giant, enormous arse. and it's called Rupert Murdoch, and everybody's up it. Okay, Tony Abbott was up it. He had a torch leading the way. Malcolm Turnbull, for whatever you may think of Malcolm Turnbull, let's be honest, he did have standards above which he would not go. Scott Morrison's up it, who he is so far up it. Andrew Bolt is up it. And Gina Rinehart's up it. What's interesting is that actually Andrew Bolt's up Gina Rinehart's arse, and she's up Murdoch's arse. Murdoch's arse is like a babushka doll of arses. And out of that thing comes fear and division and hatred. You see it in America with his Fox News channel. He created Donald Trump, the Cheezel in chief. He created Brexit. He decides what countries do, and it's a blight, it's a cancer, it's a virus on us all. And that's the politics out of the way. We'll move on to cheerier things. And while I was at the Comedy Cafe doing these shows, I was invited with my wife, Mary Keneally, who some of you may remember as Debbie of Tim and Debbie from Australia Standing in It. We were invited to go to Sydney to do a television show for, I'm sad to say this, how hypocritical of me, for Channel 10, which at the time was owned by Rupert Murdoch. And so we went up there and we did this show, which was never shown in Melbourne. And that sort of made a big difference to our position in the world. It was because of that we got a television series called Australia Standing in It. And oh heavens, what are we doing? That's okay. I will set the alarm. Just hang on, just so I don't go over time. So if we set the alarm for, now let's just see, we've got it now. Okay, so we do that. Okay, there we go. No. And okay, there. Look, this is a little hint that I learned from experience. Make sure it's PM, not AM. I was doing a show in Tasmania, and I set the alarm to finish at 10:30. I thought PM, but I set it for 10:30 AM. And the show just kept going on and on and on, and people were leaving, and I couldn't work out what was happening. And then finally, at 10:30 AM, the alarm went off and I could finish. But anyway, I've made sure that it's doing the right thing. Leaving showbiz aside, one of the questions that was asked of me was about my, I suppose, activism, environmental activism. I think this is the right one. No, that's the wrong one. Is that the right one? Are you seeing that the right way around? I never remember. Anyway, I think that's right. This is a little booklet I produced. Actually, I was for some time a research associate at Melbourne University. And the project I was doing was called The Last Tim Tam, because I'm very concerned, particularly about climate change, but also the limits to growth. It's an interest. There are so many interesting facts in the world that not many people know about. Somebody sent me a message. Oh, 5 minutes ago. I knew it was 5 minutes ago. I set my alarm. Anyway, somebody sent me that message. I just, in terms of the fact, 96% of all terrestrial animals on the globe are either human beings or the animals that we harvest and farm for our use. 96% of all living creatures on the surface of the earth are either us or in service of us. It's not always been that way. At some point, even if you go back 50 years, it would have been in the 20 or 30%. So we're ravaging the planet, and I give talks. And I've done shows called Bugger the Polar Bears, This is Serious, and Pardon My Carbon, and The People We Should Eat First, and lots and lots of shows about climate change, which have had absolutely no effect. We're doing nothing about it. A recent report said that Australia is at the bottom of the list of OECD countries when it comes to dealing with climate change. But this project came from a talk I gave at Melbourne High School. And I was giving a talk to 800 students and staff about climate change. And I was about to say polar bears are going to become extinct. And I thought, I've said that 1,000 times. David Attenborough said it 1,000 times. Everybody said it 1,000 times. And I suddenly said to them, Tim Tams will become extinct. and every little ear sort of wiggled and got excited about it, because Tim Tams will become extinct. The land that we grow the cocoa beans on, which is mostly in Africa, is now turning to desert. As people now move the cocoa trees higher up mountains where it gets cooler and moister, they're now getting diseases that they're prone to, but weren't experiencing in their original positions. So Tim Tams will become extinct for all sorts of reasons. And this little booklet I produced to talk about these things, about how we're making an undue impact in the world. So one of the things I like to do when I talk to seniors, because I only get to talk to seniors, I'm old. Most of the world thinks I died a long time ago, but I'm still here. Hey, I like to talk to seniors about what they do with their time once they're retired. Now, I know it's tempting to float down the Danube, and if you want to do that, do it soon, because the Danube's going to dry up. It did a couple of years ago dry up, and they couldn't go down the Danube because it was too shallow. So if you want to do things like that, you can't do it now because of the pandemic. But when things open up again, you want to do that, sure, go and do that. But think about the other things that you can give your time to. The Bayside, there's a wonderful environmental group in Bayside that you could join. But it's not only that, it's the things you can do for your fellow citizens. You can volunteer through the council, and I really encourage you to do that. You can become part of the walking bus, you can become part of Meals on Wheels. There's all sorts of things you can do. And whenever I talk to volunteers, they always say they get more out of it than they put into it. It connects you to your community, it connects you to other people, it broadens your horizons, it makes your life so much happier and rewarding. So I know I'm very close to running out of time now, and we are going to open up the discussion to your questions. And I think you understand how you have to do that. There's a Q&A button. Look, I actually have a question that's come up on my screen, which is, how have you kept busy over the lockdown? Well, one of the things is my garden is a jungle. I never do anything in the garden. And I have taken the opportunity over the last many weeks to put in, how many hours would I put in? Three hours, I think, into gardening, and it's looking a lot better for that. I look, particularly early on, I started looking at Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers movies again, and old movies, the Marx Brothers and Laurel and Hardy, and more contemporary movies and documentaries. I've done a lot more reading. I have a family that has health issues, so that takes up a fair bit of time. Learning to shop online has been a great thing to do. But I'm lucky I've got a garden, and despite the fact that it is almost inaccessible to human life, the possums and the birds love it, and I delight in feeding the possums at night and watching the honey eaters come in and all sorts of things. And that gives me great joy. I do despair of people who live in mostly 1960s flats without balconies, these appalling sort of battery conditions that we imposed on people with lax planning standards, while other people got rich from developing them. And Zoom is really important. I don't know what people did in the influenza outbreak 100 years ago when they were locked down, and communicating with other people was extremely difficult. You had to stand in your front yard and yell down the street to talk to somebody. So, you know, I think the internet has made it a lot easier. And I've used this time to update my web page, to start developing an online venue, which I hope to open in the new year, which will give people an opportunity to see the comedians that you don't see on television. There's some great comedians around who haven't managed to break the glass ceiling of television. So yes, I've had a very good time. Phoning people that you don't normally phone and having a chat to them is good fun too. Anyway, we're going to open it to your questions. And I'm not sure where the questions are coming up. Hang on. Well, there we go. That's more show busy. So we've got 12 questions.
Thank you, Rod. Look, we do very, very good. Thank you for through all those different experiences. It's been fantastic to hear. There was a couple of words in there I had a giggle about because I haven't heard clag for a long time, and I haven't heard claret. So look, we do have some questions that have come through to the audience. There is one that says, used to love the ARI review, Rod. Are they still a thing?
The ARI review, review. Oh, the ARCI review. No, they sort of petered out. When I first went to university in 1968, there were 140 students involved in the review, of which 60 were on stage, and the balance were making props, doing the lights, sewing costumes, doing all sorts of things. It was an extraordinary thing. It was really a theatrical highlight of the Melbourne calendar. It got reviewed by the major newspapers, and people who would normally not go to a university did go. But because of a lot of the student activism of the 60s, the anti-war protests and all those sorts of things, the university took, because I should say, when I was there, whilst I failed, it wasn't for lack of being smart enough to do it. I just got sidetracked. But when I was there, you could do whatever you liked through the year. Within the 3 weeks prior to the exams, if you went into the Bailey Library at Melbourne University at 7 o'clock in the morning and left at 10 o'clock at night, you did that 7 days a week for 3 weeks, you could pass your exams and indeed get honours if you were up to it. But they brought in a semester system, and they brought in a continuous assessment system. So I think the last review that I heard of, and I'm not sure if they are still going, I think there were 4 people on stage, and they were pretty much it. They would have had another half dozen people helping them. But that pressure that universities now put on students, the fact that you've got to pay off a loan, the fact that when I did talk at universities before the Howard government took away student unionism, it was the university supported comedians, they supported bands, they supported all sorts of theatre. But since then, the odd time I do speak at a university, I'm talking to students who've got 1, 2, or perhaps 3 part-time jobs to keep them at university. They don't go to the campus. They do their learning online even prior to the pandemic. So the university itself has none of that social life. People who are at the university are rushing to a lecture, and then rushing to a job, and then rushing home to do an assignment, and then coming back. And so a lot of the joy that was university in those days is gone. And it's a great shame because I don't think you need to be working those sorts of hours at a university. Part of your education is the education of dealing with other people, engaging in the broader world, and that's been taken away. And it's very sad. And now that the arts have been priced out of people's range, we're going to lose a lot of critical thinking. We're going to lose a lot of our connection to our history and our past, which I don't think is a happy thing. Next question.
Next question. Okay. Rod, we've got one. Old immigrants like learning about what it was like. Any advice about how we could tackle Aussie pollies?
How we could
tackle Aussie pollies.
Oh, you'll have to just say that again. Okay, the last word?
Pollies, which I think is politicians.
Oh, okay. Oh, politicians. Look, it's really difficult because when I was a boy, there was no television, there was radio, and there was always the ABC, and bless the ABC for that little miracle that's being eaten away bit by bit. But today, everybody lives in their own world. If you've got a prejudice about anything, you can just live in the world where that prejudice is reinforced and reinforced and reinforced. And politicians, and I'll go back to Murdoch here, Murdoch does decide who the Prime Minister of Australia is going to be. There's no question about that. Through his, he's got 70, 80% of the print media in Australia. He's got his Fox News network. He does give a voice to a particular political view. And I'm not saying he's a liberal. I'm saying that if the Labor Party is willing to do what Rupert Murdoch wants them to do, then he'll do it. So engaging in politics now is really, really difficult. And in a way, I wouldn't even recommend you join a political party. But I think what you have to do, and it may be difficult, particularly for migrants whose English is a second language, it's difficult to negotiate your way through the avalanche of material that comes to you. You see in America now, there are people planning to kidnap the governor of a state. Now, these people exist in their own little closed world where everybody who isn't white, who isn't a supremacist, who isn't anti-government is on the wrong side of things, and you have every right to pick up a gun and deal with them the way you do. And Fox Media in America promotes that. They promote these white supremacists, and finding your way through all that is really, really difficult. So all I can say to people really is to try and find reputable sources. Look, in terms of climate change, go to the Bureau of Meteorology or go to the CSIRO. Don't go to all these other loony people who tell you it's not real. And for politics, look, you should start with the ABC. I know that it tries very hard with its reducing budget to keep its news department strong and informed. And I'd start always with anything to get yourself informed, really informed, not influenced, but informed by reputable sources. And if you go to the Bureau of Meteorology, they'll open up a whole world of reputable sources. If you go to the CSIRO, same thing. And if you go to the ABC, the same thing. They look often, well, I shouldn't say often, but they do make mistakes, but it isn't that often. And they do rectify them. So knowledge is power, and that's where you need to start. I know it's very difficult. The system isn't geared to be really a democracy anymore. I think most people vote without fully understanding what they're voting for. And so look, I appreciate that you're keen and want to know about these things, but it is a challenge. And if we all took on that challenge of getting the right information, we would be somewhere on the way, on a track back to where we should be. That was serious, wasn't it?
Thanks, Rod. Yes, it's good. Okay. Look, another question in there from one of our audience is, do you still live in Coburg?
No, my parents sold the house. My parents got uppity. My parents sold the house in 74 Saunders Street, Coburg. It's got a plaque on it, which I put on it. It's a paper plate, so it looks like it should be a National Trust plaque. And I wrote, "This is the birthplace of Rod Quantock," which is a bit of a lie, but anyway, I did stick it on the fence many years ago. I hope it's still there. But my parents sold that, and for a year we rented in Brunswick, and then they bought a house in Pascoe Vale, which is sort of the Toorak of that side of town, or it was then. And it was a beautiful house with a lovely garden. It was very, very nice. But when I was 2021, I moved out of home and started renting North Melbourne, Carlton, Fitzroy, North Fitzroy, and finally bought a house in Clifton Hill about a little less than 40 years ago when it was cheap.
Fantastic. Thanks, Rod.
Have you run out of questions? Sorry.
Well, I just wanted to also, before we close, is there anything else that you wanted to share with our audience? You've been very, very generous with your insights and different experiences. Is there anything you'd like to sort of close with?
Well, no, really, I think particularly talking to seniors, I think the important message is to get involved in things bigger than yourself. I know it can be a bit daunting, but wherever you choose to engage beyond your own little bubble of life, is really, it's rewarding. We have a society more and more dependent on volunteers as governments at all levels, except for local government. Local government's the best level of government. Hooray for Bayside and all those other local councils. But governments are under pressure from people who'd rather have the money spent on big business rather than dealing with people with mental illnesses or people with disabilities or, you know, people who are housebound or people who are lonely. You know, we are a country now where volunteers become more and more vital every day. And I really do encourage you to get involved in whatever it is. You know, it doesn't have to necessarily be a political issue or an environmental issue. It can be, you know, it can be something around keeping your beach clean and tidy, or, you know, there's so many things you can do and so many groups that you can join. And through your local council, obviously they have volunteer services that would welcome you with open arms. And I hope every year they put on a dinner to celebrate you. And if they don't, they should. But also they will direct you to all sorts of people. You know, if you know, if you want to play bridge for the rest of your life, but, you know, join a bridge club and make sure you don't only play bridge, but you socialise and you talk to people and you engage with them. It's, you know, it can be very difficult for older people, the elders as we call them, because they're not respected. And many of you would know how difficult it is as you get older to get a job or hold a job. There are so many pressures as you get older. There is the concept of ageism, which works against you. There's a lot that you have to fight against, but I think it really just is important not to accept the world the way it is, because the way it is doesn't work, certainly not for everybody, and to take that on and not necessarily make it a mission, but to involve yourself in improving the world. And the world will thank you, and I'll thank you. And having said all that, we are at the end, I believe. So thank you very much for your time. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to contact me, I'm very happy to give out my email address, which is simply rod.quantock@gmail.com. And you can send me messages of hope, hate and love. I don't mind whatever they are, but I'd be very pleased to engage with you further. So thank you. Thank you very much to Paula, who's done a terrific job, and to all the people you can't see who've made this and the rest of events around, is it Seniors Month, Paula?
Yes, it is, Rod. It's yeah, the month of October. So on that note, we want to really thank you so much for your time this afternoon and spending it with the Bayside community, sharing all your stories and insights. And yeah, so as Rod was saying, look, it is extremely important to stay connected. And one way that we wanted to do that is open up the Seniors Festival for a whole month of October. So I think we've put in the Q&A there a link should you want to connect more with the Bayside, the opportunities that are coming up. We've still got a couple of weeks. So jump on and see what else is available. There's lots of activities coming up, and we do also have a couple of more guest speakers as well. So once again, I want to thank you and my team for being on board today, and have a lovely evening. Thank you all.